It strikes all across the country, a common bacterium with a deadly difference. This one eats the body from the inside out. It needs only 3 days to kill. And as health authorities race to stop its spread, even they can't be sure where it's coming from or who it will strike next. Harlingen, Texas, the year 2000. Marcella Lawler's 11-month-old son, Marion, had been recovering from chickenpox when he suddenly took a turn for the worst. Burning with fever, he would not stop crying. Marcella called her pediatrician, who told her to rush to the emergency room. At Valley Baptist Hospital, nurses were standing by. They hurried Marion into the ER and took blood samples for testing. The staff had no idea what was making the little boy so sick. As they worked on her son, all Marcella could do was watch.
What a parent feels is you're completely anxious and you're scared to death because at that moment we didn't know what the problem was.
But this baby had an extra ally on his side. His grandfather and namesake, Dr. Marion Lawler, was a cardiac surgeon at the hospital. Called in to examine his grandson, the doctor was astonished and alarmed. The baby's skin was red and splotchy. He had a high fever and appeared to be crashing. Dr. Lawler suspected his grandson had a serious systemic infection. The little boy's organs were beginning to fail.
From the moment I first saw him, I feared for his life. His vital signs were terrible. His heart was racing over 200 beats a minute. His respirations were shallow, 60 times a minute. Blood pressure was low. I knew he was critically ill.
His grandfather hoped the blood results would help explain the mystery. But it would take hours for them to come back. Hours his grandfather feared young Marion did not have.
Dr. Lawler said, just prepare yourself because he's gonna get a lot more sick and it's gonna take a lot more time for him to get better. I'm sorry. And so then I knew that he was very, very ill and that it was gonna take much more time for them to stabilize him.
Dr. Lawler knew his facility didn't have the resources to treat young Marion. By this time, the young child's arm was beginning to turn blue from poor circulation. He called the Texas Children's Hospital in Houston for help.
Larry, let me tell you about my grandson. He's 11 months old. He's got bad sepsis. I don't know what's the matter, but he's got a blood clot in his right arm already. It's blue. I briefly described his condition to them, and they readily agreed that he needed to come up there as soon as possible. Okay, how soon?
Every second would count. The Children's Hospital sent a medical transport plane. The medevac plane rushed to Harlingen to pick up the child. It carried critical care nurses and pediatrician Cynthia Peacock.
We talked to the intensive care specialist in the unit They felt that we were going to have to do some initial work on him before we could actually get him back on the plane back to Houston. I don't think they knew the extent of it. We were worried.
But the infant was too sick to be moved right away. With his blood pressure plummeting, Dr. Peacock and her team worked to stabilize baby Marion.
He had chickenpox about 5 days ago, and it didn't bother him. Yeah, he was getting over it.
His illness defied all their attempts, and they were running out of time. They needed to get the baby to Houston.
I would say maybe the first hour, hour and a half, that everything we did, from intubating, putting him on the ventilator, putting a central line in him, giving him blood products, he just wasn't responding. And so it was like, anything you could possibly think of to do at the time to get him out of the door. That's how we had it in our brain was, okay, one step ahead, we're going to confront this monster.
At last, they were able to move the baby out of the hospital, but their hold was tenuous. His breathing became shallow.
When Dr. Peacock came in, I kept interrupting them to tell me when the baby was going to get better. And she put her arms on my shoulders and said he was going to get a lot worse.
With no time to waste, the baby was loaded onto the plane. It was like a mobile hospital, loaded with supplies and equipment the tiny patient might require. He would need all of it. Dr. Peacock hoped he would have a chance, but then the troubles intensified.
We weren't able to take off right away because then we had to do 15 or 20 more minutes working on him in the back. And a lot of it was, can we go? My whole concern was, oh my goodness, we're going to have to turn around and go back to the hospital, go back to the intensive care unit to work on him some more. We can't go. He's not going to make it.
The crew finally managed to stabilize him enough to take off, and the plane headed for Houston. In flight, the baby's condition was precarious. With the slightest movement, his blood pressure went into a downward spiral. In order to save baby Marion, they would need a clear path to Houston.
Houston's the fourth largest city in the United States, so there's all kinds of planes coming in. We're having to tell the tower and Houston that we're coming in and we're coming in low, so you're going to have to move all of your traffic out of the way.
With time running out for baby Marion, Houston cleared all air traffic for the medevac plane. Young Marion was rushed into the intensive care unit at the Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. A swift-moving disease was ravaging the 11-month-old. His heart and lungs weren't pumping enough blood and oxygen through his body. His vital organs were in jeopardy. They thought he might be suffering from a strep infection, but they had never seen one so severe. Pediatrician Dr. Larry Jefferson and his team went right to work.
When Marion rolled into our ICU, we immediately could see he was in septic shock. His body was swollen, his face was swollen, his face was red, and we were concerned.
X-rays showed that the life-saving fluids pumped into young Marion's body were filling his lungs. The doctors had to clear his airway.
We're really filling up those lungs.
When the blood tests came back, they were definitive. Baby Marion had a severe strep infection. Doctors thought this might be related to his bout of chickenpox. The opportunistic bacteria had invaded his body through open blisters and traveled through his bloodstream. For Marcella and her husband, Marion Lawler, waiting for the prognosis was agonizing.
Difficult, I know, for you. It's been a difficult transport up. As you know, Marion was very unstable. He was unstable on the plane. And the vascular space is leaking and problems keeping his blood pressure up. And the fluid is leaking through his vessels into his lung, into his tissue. we're also concerned about.
It seemed like it must have been 2 or 3 in the morning. We were retrieved by Dr. Jefferson and explained to us that Marion had chickenpox complicated by this invasive Strep A bacteria, which had sent him into streptococcal toxic shock syndrome. And he'd explained to us that the antibiotics had begun working, but that the antibiotics had caused the bacteria to release a toxin that had basically perforated our son's vascular system. And I knew that that was not good at all.
Baby Marion was given a less than 1% chance of survival.
Is, of course, the shock that he's had, the continuing problem to keep.
When they told us that he might not make it, we immediately called our parents and said, you know, Marion, they're telling us he's not going to make it. It's very serious, and he probably will not make the night. And so that was, at that moment, the doctors were, nobody was smiling. Everybody was dead serious, and they were not giving us any signs of hope.
Dr. Jefferson briefed the child's grandfather. He told him that strep can take many dangerous forms. He feared the infection in Marion's arm could turn to necrotizing fasciitis, more commonly known as flesh-eating bacteria. This disease is extremely rare and extremely deadly.
I went to the computer laboratory and looked up specifically the toxic shock syndrome associated with beta hemolytic streptococcal infection, and that's when I really became frightened.
Dr. Lawler had to do something. Texas Children's Hospital is associated with nearby Baylor College of Medicine. At Baylor, Dr. James Musser had already studied a 1998 outbreak of invasive strep. He knew the dangers of the bacteria all too well, how it releases toxins into the blood, attacking organs and eating away flesh.
It's sort of like having rockets coming at you, each of which has a different toxin associated with it. It's a very, very clever organism, a very wily organism. That facilitates these kinds of infections.
Strep itself is all too common. Anyone who's ever had a strep throat has encountered it. But sometimes, in a few rare cases, a virulent strain of the bacteria will cause severe disease. Perhaps the most terrifying manifestation is necrotizing fasciitis, known as flesh-eating bacteria, the disease that literally eats away human flesh. Dr. Edward Kaplan at the University of Minnesota keeps a database of Strep A patients for the World Health Organization.
Many of the patients who develop toxic shock and necrotizing fasciitis, they've had some kind of injury. It almost seems as if the organism tends to gravitate to areas of damaged tissue.
As baby Marion's condition worsened, doctors feared there was little they could do to stop this terrifying disease from taking his young life. In the year 2000, a toxic bacteria was threatening the life of baby Marion Lawler. As the child fought for his life, Marion's parents could only watch and hope as the doctors did all they could.
Dr. Jefferson came in and he said that he had been working with him, that he had pushed an unbelievable amount of blood into him, that his blood pressure was extremely low, that his heart rate was extremely high, that everything was not the way it's supposed to be, and that he was not responding.
As Marion Lawler clung to life, doctors in Texas began to draw on information they had learned from dealing with this disease for over 2 years. In 1998, Austin, Texas saw an alarming number of severe strep infections. Cases of invasive strep are rare, but when they show up, it's usually in a cluster. One of the largest and deadliest outbreaks ever had occurred in Austin, Texas, just 2 years earlier. In 1998, Tom Hastings came to the emergency room of an Austin area hospital. He had been suffering for 2 days with headaches, exhaustion, low-grade fever, and a dry cough.
I've been worse for a couple days.
He thought he had the flu and went to the hospital only when he started spitting up blood and finding more blood in his urine. By then, he was already in serious danger. Doctors in Austin admitted him to the hospital and diagnosed him with a bacterial infection. They began a course of antibiotics immediately. But before the drugs had a chance to work, his lungs began filling with fluid. Blood tests indicated he had something much worse than the flu. An invasive strep infection was destroying his lungs, causing a life-threatening case of pneumonia. As doctors were trying to treat Hastings, 43-year-old truck driver Dan Cooper woke up to discover something terrible on his side. Strep toxins caused blood vessels under his skin to burst, leaving a large blister.
Hey, how you doing?
Dan hurried into the ER.
Hang on, let me just take a look at this for a second.
The doctor immediately recognized the
sorry.
danger.
It is painful,
It's
huh?
sore.
Okay.
It's unbelievably sore.
It looks like we're gonna have to do some surgery.
Yeah, I better call my girlfriend.
Antibiotics alone would not stop the runaway infection. Dan was quickly prepped for surgery. He was diagnosed with a devastating strep infection that was eating away his flesh at the rate of 1 inch per hour. The doctor would have to cut away the infected tissue before more of his body was destroyed. Once the strep bacteria infects the flesh, the infected areas must be removed to stop its aggressive spread. As the bacteria advanced towards Dan's genitals, abdomen, and trunk, doctors kept cutting. Over the next 5 days, he endured 6 surgeries. Between each one, Dan spent time in the pressurized atmosphere of a hyperbaric chamber, the same kind divers use for the bends. They hoped that the pure oxygen of the chamber would inhibit the growth of the bacteria and the production of toxins, as well as accelerate the healing process.
If you have any problems equalizing your ears.
It was a last resort, an attempt to stop the devastating effects of this predatory bacteria. While doctors waited to see whether Dan Cooper would recover, Tom Hastings, who had come to the emergency room complaining of flu-like symptoms, suffered fatal cardiac arrest.
Let's get some epinephrine started, please. We in?
Epinephrine.
Okay. And no pulse.
The bacteria had lodged in his lungs, causing severe pneumonia. At the Austin Travis County Health Department, Betty Vickers had received other reports of sudden deaths.
We usually have 1 or 2 cases a year of this where people might die, but we had 2 fairly healthy individuals that died within a short period of time of each other, and we figured that there was something going on at that time.
This deadly disease was on the upswing, and Betty Vickers needed to know why. The state health department reported they had seen a rise in deaths due to invasive strep infections all across Texas.
We knew we had a problem. There was no question about it at that time. We had to do something to help protect the community.
Betty Vickers had to find out where the flesh-eating bacteria was coming from before she could hope to stop it.
He was fine at night. He just woke up.
Vickers tried to find a common connection between the victims by interviewing their spouses and co-workers.
Coughing.
What she found was a mystery begging to be solved.
No, he was very healthy.
We could not find any commonalities among these cases. They were different ages, different parts of town, different backgrounds, different cultures. We couldn't find any link between these people. Nothing.
And still, the victims kept coming. The Texas Health Department pored over the data on strep infections from hospitals across the state. Between December 1997 and mid-February 1998, the health department confirmed 27 cases of invasive Group A strep. 10 Texans had died. The cases clustered in central Texas, near Austin. Still, no connection could be made between the victims. The disease was striking young and old. A little girl in the Austin area also succumbed to the strep bacteria. Nurses went to the little girl's daycare center to take throat cultures of the other children and staff to see if they carried the deadly bacteria.
Open up real wide and stick your tongue out.
They provided antibiotics to anyone who came in contact with the child.
Stick it out for me. Hold your head up. I've been in the business for a long time, many years, and usually there's a vaccine or something, you know, how you can protect yourself. But you could go to the grocery store and not know if you were exposed or not, and it was scary.
The bacterium causing the disease was extremely common. At any given time, up to 20% of the population anywhere may carry the Streptococcus A bacterium without any symptoms at all. The danger arises when the strep mutates and becomes invasive. Texas health officials raced to find out why this deadly mutation was hitting their state so hard. The community had questions too. Public health officials set up a hotline and fielded thousands of calls. The public was in a panic.
One day we had over 500 phone calls, and our poor support person was, all they were able to do is say, give me your name and phone number and I'll have a nurse call you back.
At Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, microbiologist James Musser analyzed bacteria samples collected from victims all across the state. He was looking to find out what was making this common bacteria turn into a killer. He identified many different strains of Group A strep popping up all over Texas. But the most lethal ones were found in the Austin area. Musser's team began trying to crack the genetic codes of the deadly forms of strep.
The strategy of genome analysis is a crucial strategy now in our studies of how Group A Streptococcus causes human disease. It's now important to investigate many of the other common serotypes that cause both invasive disease and Group A strep in order to determine exactly what factors are specific to the strains that cause the flesh-eating syndrome.
Each strep bacterium contains 1.9 million pairs of chemical bases, the genetic instructions for its behavior. The strains of killer strep and the harmless forms are more than 90% identical. Musser's research focused on the other 10%, the genetic material found only in the deadly strains. Most important were the genes that held the bacterium's orders to kill. Musser's goal was to stop those orders. But even as Musser worked to understand the bacteria, the public continued to become ill. The killer strep could invade the body through a scratch or abrasion. Caught early enough, it could be treated with antibiotics, but it was seldom caught in time. In Texas, victims continued to pay with life and limb. As health officials worked tirelessly to stop its spread, the killer bacteria continued its advance against a helpless population.
Clear. Try one more time.
Despite the doctor's best efforts, a third victim died of catastrophic organ failure as the group A strep bacteria swept through his body. This killer seemed unstoppable, and despite the hours that researchers were putting in, no one had any idea of where to start. Invasive group A strep had taken hold of Texas, and one of its tiniest victims was putting up the biggest fight. "11-month-old Marion Lawler IV suffered the many horrors of strep infection. Not only was he enduring strep-induced toxic shock, but he also fought a case of streptococcal pneumonia.
He was not oxygenating his blood sufficiently, and they placed him on a special respirator called the oscillating ventilator that breathes 640 breaths a minute. And even the initial days of that, the pressures were high and the oxygen level was low, and he was barely hanging on with that ventilator.
Doctors pumped the child full of fluids to try to combat the infection. The drastic life-preserving methods rendered the infant unrecognizable, even to his father.
It was terrible. He was already grotesquely disfigured from the volume overload. We could not recognize him. He looked to be 3 times the size that he was before, and he was purple.
As young Marion Lawler lingered near death, he had an ally. His grandfather, a physician, reached out for help. He contacted Dennis Stevens at the VA hospital in Boise, Idaho. Over the years, Stevens had become the leading authority on invasive group A strep. He knew exactly how dangerous this adversary was. He was one of the first to recognize deadly new strains, one of the first to declare it a potential time bomb.
The organism has the ability to adapt. It has the ability to acquire new virulence factors. Group A strep doubles about every 23 minutes. Its ability to adapt is hundreds, if not thousands times greater than that of the human host.
One particular donor is nearly twice as high as the other two, so yeah, we may see some very significant differences in the recruits from San Diego.
Dr. Stevens recognized the gravity of young Marion's condition. He was the first to alert the medical community that strep bacteria could cause toxic shock in healthy young people. In his 20 years of experience with the disease, he had seen a growing number of cases in patients around the world.
We had a case over in eastern Idaho. A kid was out berry picking, developed a scar.
The reason that people develop these deep-seated infections are that they encounter an organism to which they don't have natural resistance. They don't have antibodies against the organism itself or some of the toxins it produces.
But Dr. Stevens had also begun to develop a way to combat the disease. It all started with an Idaho lawyer named Brad Andrews.
Brad Andrews was a very healthy young man, played handball and racquetball. He acquired an abrasion on his elbow, and about 24 to 36 hours later, he developed a tremendous swelling about the elbow with red skin and streaks up his arm.
Brad didn't realize it, but he was seeing the first signs of the potentially fatal infection.
I went to work, and it was probably 3 to 4 hours later, and the symptoms were continually getting worse.
He drove himself to the hospital and was immediately admitted.
The first night I was in the hospital, they told me that my blood pressure dropped very low, and I asked him, I said, what's going on? And he said, he goes, I don't know, but if you don't get your blood pressure up, you could die.
Brad was fortunate that his wife worked for Dr. Stevens. She knew how bad the disease could be. She also knew that the doctor had begun developing a new drug treatment for the disease. Brad would be one of the first to try it out.
We looked at the ability of clindamycin to suppress toxin production in vitro, in test tubes. And it was a very potent inhibitor of the toxin. And we thought that that might be a reasonable agent to use to treat these potent toxin-producing strains of Group A strep.
Feeling okay?
Brad was switched to the antibiotic clindamycin to stop the toxin and combat the lethal infection. And within days, he began to get better. The treatment given early had worked. Dr. Stevens told Marion's grandfather about clindamycin. Dr. Lawler realized every piece of information he gathered could save his grandson's life. The young boy's father was desperate for anything to help his son.
Really, we were living every second of every single day for our son. Any change in his blood pressure, 1 degree or the other, change in his temperature, in his urine output, in his breathing capabilities, we were really hanging on by a thread at that point. First week or two, the news just seemed to be getting worse and worse and worse.
Marion was now being kept under a heated blanket to try to stabilize his body temperature and combat further infection. He was in desperate need of a medical miracle. At the Texas Children's Hospital in 2000, little Marion Lawler was in danger. He had been medevaced to Houston, rushed into intensive care, only for his parents to learn he faced a life-threatening infection, the invasive form of Strep A. But now the research of his grandfather and the lessons learned from other strep patients would begin to pay off. The baby was given a full spectrum of antibiotics, including clindamycin, to fight the lethal bacteria. Finally, the infant began to stabilize.
With streptococcal invasive A, the most important thing is that they make it the first 72 hours. So for us to make it those 3 days was, we were actually happy. He made it, he's gonna get better. And then his kidney shut down. And then he gets the pneumonia. Then we think he might lose the arm.
It took the constant vigilance of the Lawler family and an army of doctors and nurses to keep the infant's body functioning at its most basic level.
There were about 19 different pediatric specialists that were involved in his evaluation or his treatment in some capacity.
The Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention had found that of the more than 100 strains or variations of the group A strep, 2 were found to be most life-threatening, M1 and M3. The CDC found that these strains were more likely to be fatal, more likely to cause dangerous clusters of cases, like the one in Austin. The Austin area had become a boomtown, and public health nurse Betty Vickers feared the unusual strep was the downside of the city's success.
At that time, this area was having a significant growth, population increase. We don't know if that's how it was introduced or not, but you can kind of suspect or think that way.
Public health officials believe the influx of new residents from across the country might have introduced the new strains of strep. The locals had no resistance. This is how the scientists believed that victims like Dan Cooper and baby Marion Lawler had become infected. But despite having some luck with treatments, they were still looking for a cure. The doctors continued to gather research from all over the world. Information on a new form of treatment came from thousands of miles away. Doctors in Canada were reporting they could reduce invasive strep fatalities. In Toronto, Kathy Mulville led a busy life with her husband and young daughter. She seldom let a cold bother her. But one morning in 1994, she felt particularly ill.
I went to bed one night after having some family over for a birthday party and woke up in the morning feeling as if I had the flu. And I also had a really severe pain in my right arm. To me, it actually felt like it was also down part of my back.
Kathy hoped it would pass, but by the next day, she only felt worse. Pain relievers weren't working on her sore arm. She grew concerned that she was suffering from more than the flu.
Yes. Let's go ahead and take your temperature.
Kathy went to the doctor, but her strange collection of symptoms did not present a clear diagnosis.
The physician said that she couldn't find any reason for the extreme pain, that she was concerned about it. So she said, you know, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're afraid, go to the emergency department and explain to them what's been happening to you over the last few days.
That night, she went to the hospital. By the time she got to the emergency room, her kidneys were shutting down. Her white blood cell count rose, indicating a severe infection as her throat and chest began to swell. She was rushed to the ICU. Diagnosis: massive infection. Cause: unknown.
Apparently the resident who was on duty called around the country trying to figure out what was wrong with me and got in touch with Dr. Lowe at Mount Sinai Hospital.
The resident described the symptoms to strep expert Donald Lowe, who suspected that Kathy's toxic shock might have been caused by group A strep.
So tell me a bit about how he's
If that were true, her prognosis looked grim.
We told the family that, in fact, the likelihood of her dying from this illness was about an 80% chance. We wanted her transferred to Mount Sinai Hospital, so not only could we institute the appropriate therapy, but also carry out the appropriate surgery.
On Dr. Lowe's orders, Kathy was rushed to the better-equipped hospital. They had to remove the infected flesh before the deadly bacteria spread too far. But surgery was just the beginning. With Kathy's life on the line, Dr. Lowe decided to try a brand new treatment they had been experimenting with. It was called immunoglobulin therapy. Delivering a concentrated version of the body's own antibodies, the therapy was thought to inactivate the dangerous strep toxins. Kathy would be one of the very first to get it for invasive strep.
Once we recognized that Kathy likely had streptococcal toxic shock, we instituted the appropriate antibiotics, that is penicillin and clindamycin. And we also instituted high-dose antibodies, that is intravenous immunoglobulin.
Intravenous immunoglobulin was a therapy that had been used to treat other illnesses, but had barely been used for streptococcal toxic shock. But even if the treatment worked, the bacteria already had too much of a head start. No life-saving drugs could reach her already dead tissue. Surgeons continued to cut out the infected portions of her flesh in a race to stop the spread of the strep toxins. And all they could do was hope the immunoglobulin therapy would work. In Texas, little Marion Lawler had been critically ill for several weeks. Diagnosed with invasive strep, given a less than 1 in 100 chance of survival, he was treated with massive doses of antibiotics. And slowly, he began to pull through. After a month of intensive care, he was taken off the ventilator and began to breathe on his own.
And then the day, of course, he was off the ventilator, it was just a wonderful, very happy, very happy.
Baby Marion was on the road to recovery. But even if you recover, invasive strep can leave its mark. Kathy Mulvale had endured 8 operations to remove the invasive strep that had devoured the tissue of her arm and shoulder. But each surgery revealed that the bacteria had spread much more than suspected.
Originally, they'd been just going to the front of my one arm, and what they did is they made an incision from the base of my elbow all the way up the back of my arm, across my armpit, and then halfway over to my spine. And what they found in there was 11 necrotic muscles, so 11 rotten muscles, and they removed all of those and then took out half of my shoulder blade as well.
By the time the necrotizing fasciitis was identified, it already had a 3-day head start. Luckily, Dr. Lowe's innovative immunoglobulin therapy, pumping up the body's own defenses, turned out to work well, and Kathy began to recover. To Dr. Lowe, catching an invasive strep infection early on is vital to a successful recovery.
One of the great difficulties with this disease is making an early, correct diagnosis. And often when physicians first see a patient, they don't suspect the illness. In fact, 30% were misdiagnosed. Today, that problem still exists because the symptoms are so nondescript and often associated with a flu-like illness, pain, myalgias, sore joints, fever, that group A strep is not even suspected as a cause of their symptoms.
Dr. Donald Lowe's research team in Canada dedicated themselves to early detection and learning how the disease gets passed from one person to another. A carrier might not even realize he or she is infected. In Kathy Mulvale's case, family members carried the same dangerous strain of group A strep, while presenting different symptoms or no symptoms at all.
Always one of the questions is, what's the likelihood of someone else who's had contact with a patient with severe streptococcal disease? What's the likelihood that they'll come down with infection? Family members, patients that were in contact with family members or other individuals for more than 4 hours a day in the previous week, they were in fact at greater risk of developing severe streptococcal disease.
In trying to determine how she caught the disease, Kathy recalled a small cut on her little finger, hardly noticeable,
Goodness, would you please cover your mouth when you cough? Here's a tissue.
but an open invitation for the bacteria to invade.
The theory is that one of the children coughed, got bacteria on their hand, and then held my hand. The bacteria worked its way in through the cut and then up into the soft tissue in my shoulder, where I had perhaps torn a muscle using this new ski machine, and that's where all the damage began.
Today, Kathy Mulvale is living a full and healthy life. She started an organization to help spread the word about the dangers of the strep bacteria. Her organization produced a brochure called a Life Guide to help people recognize the symptoms and severity of the disease, and to persuade their doctors to consider it as a possible diagnosis.
A parent or a patient or a husband or spouse can go into a physician and say, this is what we're experiencing right now. Is it possible that this person has necrotizing fasciitis? And for a physician to recognize necrotizing fasciitis is very difficult. If they've never seen it before, they will think that you have a pain of some sort and that you have the flu, and they will send you home. But the Life Guide, you can confidently them on whether or not that's what you have.
Patients in Texas have benefited from Kathy's experience and Dr. Lowe's immunoglobulin therapy. Dan Cooper has made a full recovery. Dan and little Marion were among the lucky ones. In just the first 5 months of 1998, Texas had 232 cases of invasive Strep A. In less than 6 months, 33 people died. A third of them were children. Today, the CDC reports as many as 1,500 deaths are caused yearly by the invasive Group A strep bacteria. To prevent this type of devastating outbreak, Dr. James Dale and his team at the University of Tennessee are working to create a vaccine. He is combining proteins from 26 different strains of Group A strep. Thanks to research in genomes, Dr. Dale and others can select the bacterial proteins that will, it's hoped, cause antibody production without causing illness and guard against the disease.
This vaccine was designed to protect against 80 to 90% of those serotypes that are responsible for serious invasive disease, and also 80 to 90% of those types that cause uncomplicated strep throat. We believe that the vaccine will have a significant impact on the entire burden of streptococcal disease.
You better get in the boat.
The vaccine could prevent thousands of cases like that of baby Marion Lawler. Now 4, he has made a complete recovery and enjoys a happy, healthy life.
In my work as a cardiovascular surgeon, when I do a bypass or other surgical procedure, it's generally on someone 60 or 70 years old, and so I may provide them an additional 10, 12, 15 years of life. But when you save a child 1 year old, you're giving him his entire life.
The bacteria still mystifies. The disease still threatens. But now that gift of life may be within our grasp.